A new record low for rates. Yet another record low for the market. Despite the record low, it may not be the last rate cut this year. I believe that this will add to the already enormous level of debt that... Well, from record low to record low to...
Unheard of, unprecedented. But the record low cash rate may...
We think they're going down to 0.75% by the end of the year.
We make coffee, not cars.
Interest rates are clearly going to go down and go down again.
A new record low for rates. The former RBA board member who says the back-to-back cuts could be a mistake.
Well, I was surprised that they moved so quickly, but the markets weren't surprised. I just think it's a risky strategy.
And a nation making coffee, not cars. Why low-paid jobs can't do the heavy lifting on kick-starting living standards. It's been a big day for the Reserve Bank, slashing the cash rate to 1%. The 0.25 percentage point cut follows a move at last month's meeting, and here's how the first back-to-back rate cut since 2012 played out.
25 cuts.
They have cut rates by 25 basis points. That's taken the RBA cash rate to 1%. Yet another record low for the market, and very much what the market was anticipating. Despite the record low, it may not be the last rate cut this year. Speaking tonight in Darwin, where the economy is in recession, Philip Lowe left the door open to further cuts if unemployment and inflation don't improve.
So we will be closely monitoring how things evolve over coming months. But given the circumstances we face, the board is prepared to adjust interest rates again if needed to get us closer to full employment and achieve the inflation target in a way that supports the collective welfare of all Australians, including those who live here in the Northern Territory.
But there's no point in a rate cut if it isn't passed on by the banks, particularly the big ones, as they have 80% of the market. This time, ANZ's the only bank to pass it on in full. CBA and NAB passed on just 19 basis points, but CBA's interest-only customers do get the full 25. Adding June and July's cuts together, Westpac P&I borrowers are the best off with a total 40-point discount, while CBA's interest-only customers get the full 50. While borrowers are cheering the second rate cut in a month, a former Reserve Bank board member says the RBA should have held its fire. Professor Warwick McKibbin says leaving rates on hold and using the clout of the RBA instead to push for policy changes in Canberra was the only responsible option. Warwick McKibbin, you were against the first cut last month. You must be definitely against the move today from the RBA.
Well, I was surprised that they moved so quickly, but the markets weren't surprised. I just think it's a risky strategy. I understand what they're doing, and it's similar to most central banks, but in the end, it's going to lead to an enormous problem for debt markets if the world starts to change.
Does the RBA really have a choice, though, given where we are with inflation and employment?
So their mandate is to have low inflation between 2% and 3%, and they're definitely outside the band. And their argument, although they haven't talked about the exact mechanism, but their argument is by pushing unemployment down even further, that should start to increase wage. The problem, though, is the implications for other types of assets. I mean, the stock market's hitting record highs. It's also not clear that the policy change will do what the Reserve Bank wants it to do. The main mechanism is a weaker currency, and we saw the currency actually strengthen when the announcement was made today.
So you believe that this will add to the already enormous level of debt that's held particularly by households but by all other sectors of the economy. You don't think that these 50 basis points will have a meaningful effect on demand and therefore on inflation and employment?
Well, again, the Governor was speaking at a panel that I was on last week, and he made the point that the standard transmission mechanism for monetary policy, the most important one for Australia, is through depreciating the exchange rate. The second mechanism is by reducing the cost of debt for leveraged households, so they'll go out and spend. The problem with that argument is there are a lot of people whose income depend on interest rates, so people who are net savers are going to be having less purchasing power. So it becomes a point where people lose confidence when interest rates get too low, and it may well be that the channels outside of the exchange rate don't work as effectively.
Given the outlook and the rhetoric that we've had from the Reserve Bank and the unlikeliness of any significant policy changes from Canberra, do you expect the RBA will continue to cut?
Well, I mean, my guess is, given what we're doing now, if the goal is to get unemployment down to 4.5% and the goal is to keep doing it until inflation rises, the natural interpretation is that we'll keep seeing cuts until we start seeing unemployment fall to record lows and we start seeing inflation rising back into the band.
What more should Philip Lowe be doing, or how should he be stepping up the rhetoric to government about what they need to be doing? How dire is the situation for the economy at the moment and its outlook?
Well, again, the economy is not that dire. If you read the release of Philip Lowe's statement, I mean, the world economy is weakening and there are big risks in the world economy, but it's still growing above 3%. The Australian economy is weakening, but it's still growing. There are some weakness in consumption, weakness in investment. So I don't think we're plunging into a problematic recession-like atmosphere. But I think basically the problem is that the economy is very sluggish, as is the world economy. So we're part of a trend which we don't fully understand. And I just think that it's probably time for the bank, or for at least a group of the senior officials, to get together and have a discussion, more open, wide-ranging discussion about what to do with the productivity decline in the Australian economy and how to reverse it.
Is it also time for the bank to take a look at whether, given, as you said, we're in a very different time, we're in a very uncertain space, we haven't been here before, either Australia or the global economy, is it time that we abandon this 2 to 3% inflation target? Because right now it seems, quite frankly, almost impossible, and yet the economy, as you say, isn't doing that poorly.
So the problem we face is that central bank policy works most effectively when the central bank is credible. With a credible central bank, wage setters will believe the inflation projections, they'll believe what you say and they'll react accordingly. If you don't hit your target year after year, you lose credibility. So my view is that there should be a reassessment of the mandate of the Reserve Bank, a complete and a very transparent reassessment to come up with a mandate that's more suitable to the world in which we currently live. And to me, that's nominal GDP targeting, although other people have argued for alternatives. It seems like the inflation targeting central banks will be becoming more and more scarce because most countries are having this reassessment. I think it's time for that reassessment to occur in Australia.
And given that the Australian dollar didn't really fall following this rate decision, the other instrument of how this is passed through to the economy is through interest rates at the banks. The banks have indicated, and their balance sheets show, that they're unlikely to be able to pass it on in full. That again sort of makes the RBA's move fairly impotent, doesn't it?
Well, that's a really big problem. Once you get down to very low interest rates, it really puts a lot of pressure on the balance sheet of banks. And I think this is a point where we're getting very close to that situation. Again, it's not. I can see why the banks wouldn't pass the whole interest rate change on, and I can see why ever falling interest rates could undermine confidence in the economy. But the bank has made the call, and we'll see what happens. This is an interesting experiment which could have some very long-term implications for the Australian economy.
Well, from record low to record low, today's cut was all about trying to lift stubbornly low inflation and employment. But on the labour market, it's the wrong jobs being created. The hollowing out of manufacturing has seen a big rise in service industry jobs which don't produce the wealth needed to lift living standards. Stephen Long reports.
Unheard of, unprecedented, but the record low cash rate may have lower to go.
We think they're going down to 0.75% by the end of the year.
That low?
Yes.
The aim is jobs and more jobs. The Reserve Bank wants the unemployment rate down at 4.5% to boost wages and chronically low inflation. But when it comes to lifting living standards, there's jobs and there's jobs.
There's been an incredible lift of jobs in government administration over the past 12 months. I think that masks the underlying strength of the labour market. These jobs also don't contribute a lot to the productive capacity of the economy.
So we've had a bureaucrat-led recovery at state and federal?
Look, we have. It's been across the board, a really big lift in jobs. Ultimately, these jobs are going to be paid for as well. So actually, the tax paid by workers is being rising as a share of income.
And What does that mean for the strength of employment in the overall labour market?
Firstly, I think it says that if we didn't have that big lift in government administration jobs, we would have had much softer employment figures. And I also think it goes some way to explaining why we've had strong employment growth but relatively soft economic growth, because a lot of the jobs that we've generated via the government sector have done very little to improve the productive capacity of the economy.
A short black. Another concern is the hollowing out of an economy where these days we make coffee, not cars.
If you have an economy where most of the jobs are in low wage, particularly low wage, human intense work, it means that you lose the stable base for innovation, for research and development, for expansion of businesses, and overall economic security, and also a basis for high wages in the economy. You lose all of that if you focus all of your industry makeup purely in services.
But the new jobs aren't all in low-paid services sectors.
In the private sector, the area which has had the biggest lift in headcount the past 12 months has been professional services. So that's accountants, legal services, management consultants, and again, they're professions that are associated with circulating wealth in the economy rather than generating wealth.
Australia, wake up and smell the coffee.